Listen carefully, because what you're about to hear is not just a message, it's a warning. Before you walk away, before you close that door, before you say, I'm done, God is asking you to pause. Not everything that feels exhausting is meant to be abandoned, and not every delay is a denial. There are moments in life when your emotions get loud, but God's voice gets quiet. And if you only listen to how you feel, you might walk away from something heaven is still working on. There's a moment you will face, and it will feel like clarity, like calm after chaos, like finally breathing again. You'll think, I'm free now. I've made the right decision. I feel at peace. But here's the truth most people don't discover until much later. Not everything that feels like peace is from God. Sometimes it's just escape, and that changes everything. Because escape always feels like relief at first. It feels like lightness, like pressure lifting, like your mind finally getting silence after months of emotional noise. But here's the question you rarely stop to ask in that moment. What exactly did you just escape from? And what did you leave unresolved? Most people miss this part. They assume that peace is always proof of direction. But emotional relief is not always spiritual confirmation. This is where everything shifts, because there is a kind of peace that doesn't come from clarity. It comes from avoidance, not from answers, but from distance. Not from healing, but from numbing what hurts. You convince yourself, I'm better off without this. But deep inside, nothing has actually been healed. It has just been avoided. And avoidance always feels peaceful until life repeats the lesson. But here's the deeper truth. Sometimes God will lead you into peace after obedience, and sometimes the mind creates peace after giving up too early. They feel similar at first, but their outcomes are completely different. One leads you forward. The other keeps you stuck in a cycle wearing a new disguise. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from something and felt instantly relieved? But weeks later, the same emotional patterns show up in a different situation. Different person, different name, same emotional struggle. That is not coincidence. That is repetition. And repetition is often life saying, you didn't learn it, you only left it. But here's where it gets even deeper. Most people never question their peace because they assume discomfort is always a sign to leave. But what if discomfort is not punishment? What if it's formation? What if the very thing making you uneasy is also the thing shaping your discernment, your strength, your emotional maturity? This is why this is so dangerous. Because escape doesn't just remove pain, it can also remove growth. And you don't realize what you lost until you face a similar moment again and react the same way. But here's the shift you need to understand. True peace doesn't just feel calm. It feels clear even when it's uncomfortable. It doesn't rush your decision, it refines it. It doesn't scream, leave now. It whispers, understand first. So before you accept every sense of relief as confirmation, pause, ask yourself, is this peace coming from clarity or from exhaustion? Am I being led or am I just tired of trying? Because exhaustion will always push you to escape, but clarity will teach you to see. And what you see changes everything. This is where maturity begins. Not when you always stay, not when you always leave, but when you stop confusing escape for peace and start recognizing what God is actually shaping through your discomfort. And once you see that, you will never make the same decision the same way again. Something most people never realize until it's too late. Not everything in your life is destroyed by force. Sometimes nothing is broken, nothing is taken, nothing is lost, and yet everything still falls apart. But here's the truth. The enemy doesn't destroy everything. Sometimes he just convinces you to walk away. And the most dangerous part is this. You don't even feel attacked. You feel understood. You feel tired. You feel like you're finally making a wise decision. But what if that decision wasn't wisdom at all? What if it was persuasion? This is where everything shifts. Because real destruction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like calm reasoning in your mind at 2 a.m. when you replay every hurt, every disappointment, every silence, until leaving feels like the only logical answer. And slowly, without realizing it, you start building a case against what you once valued. Not all at once, but piece by piece. A memory here, a disappointment there. A moment you felt unseen, a moment you felt unheard. And suddenly, what was once meaningful starts to look toxic, impossible, not worth it. But here's the truth most people miss. The enemy rarely shows up saying, I will destroy your life. He whispers something far more subtle. You deserve better. Just leave. And that whisper feels like self-respect. It feels like clarity. It feels like maturity. But underneath it, there is no direction, only separation. Most people miss this part. They think spiritual attack always feels dramatic. But the most effective attacks are quiet, internal, thought-based. Emotional fatigue disguised as wisdom, because once you are convinced to walk away, nothing needs to be destroyed externally. You will do it yourself. This is where it gets deeper. Have you ever noticed how the same situation can look completely different depending on your emotional state? When you're grounded, you see possibility. When you're exhausted, you see problems everywhere. And in that exhausted state, the enemy doesn't need to create new problems. He just magnifies what's already there until your vision becomes so narrow, you forget everything that was also good. And then comes the moment of decision. You don't feel pressured. You don't feel forced. You feel certain. But certainty without clarity is one of the most dangerous states a human mind can enter, because now you're not questioning anymore. You're finalizing. And once you finalize something emotionally, you stop seeing it spiritually. But here's what no one tells you. Walking away doesn't always end the battle. Sometimes it relocates it. You leave one situation only to find yourself facing the same emotional patterns in a new face, a new environment, a new story, different setting. Same lesson, and slowly, life begins to reveal something uncomfortable. Maybe the issue wasn't only them. Maybe something inside you was being developed in that season. This is where everything shifts, because now the question is no longer just, should I leave? The question becomes, who is influencing my interpretation of this situation? My pain or my purpose, my exhaustion or my discernment? Because the enemy doesn't need to destroy what God is building. He only needs to convince you it's not worth staying long enough to see it completed. And once you walk away too early, you don't just lose a person or a place. You lose a process you didn't yet understand. So before you assume distance is deliverance, pause, because not every exit is freedom. Not every whisper to leave is your voice. There are moments in life that feel ordinary on the surface. A relationship, a friendship, a connection that started naturally, almost casually, but something about it keeps you stuck in thought, keeps you emotionally engaged, keeps you questioning more than you expected, and you can't quite explain why. But here's the truth. You're not just dealing with a person, you might be handling an assignment. And that realization changes the entire way you interpret what you're going through. Because once something becomes an assignment, it stops being simple. It stops being random. It stops being just about comfort or compatibility. This is where everything shifts. Now every conversation carries weight. Every disagreement feels deeper. Every silence feels meaningful in a way you can't ignore. And most people miss this part. They assume intensity always means toxicity. They assume struggle always means wrong person. They assume discomfort is proof they should leave immediately. But what if discomfort is not rejection? What if it's revelation? What if the reason this person triggers you, challenges you, exposes parts of you you've avoided for years is not because they are the problem, but because something within you is being revealed? Now pause here, because this is where the mind usually rushes to defend itself. You're overthinking, you're just trying to justify staying. You need peace, not confusion. But here's the deeper layer most people never explore. Not every assignment feels peaceful while you are inside it. Some assignments feel like pressure, like emotional stretching, like internal conflict that doesn't resolve quickly. And that discomfort makes you assume something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if something is forming? Think about it. Some people don't enter your life to complete you. They enter to confront you. They reveal how you love, how you trust, how you react when you're not in control, how you behave when your expectations are challenged. And that revelation doesn't feel gentle. It feels uncomfortable. But here's the truth that separates wisdom from reaction. Not everything that challenges you is meant to be removed from your life. Some things are meant to refine how you show up in it. This is where everything shifts. Because now you are no longer just asking, do I like this situation? You start asking, What is this situation exposing in me? And that question is far more powerful and far more difficult to ignore. Most people avoid this level of thinking because it removes blame from the surface and places responsibility inward, and inward reflection is uncomfortable. It forces you to grow instead of escape. It forces you to stay present long enough to understand what is actually happening beneath the emotional noise. But here's the danger. If you mislabel an assignment as a mistake, you might walk away before the lesson is complete. And then life doesn't just end the story there. It repeats it. Different person, different environment, same emotional lesson. Because assignments don't disappear when ignored. They reappear in different forms until they are understood. And this is what most people never realize. You don't always graduate from a situation by leaving it. Sometimes you only graduate when you understand it. So the real question is not just, is this person right for me? The deeper question is, what is this situation trying to develop in me? Because once you see the assignment, you stop reacting blindly. You start observing differently. You start responding with awareness instead of emotion. And even if the assignment eventually ends, you don't leave empty. You leave transformed. And that is the difference between repeating cycles and finally breaking them. There's a moment in every difficult situation when your mind quietly begins to negotiate with your heart, not in loud decisions, not in dramatic breakdowns, but in small, invisible thoughts that slowly change how you see everything. You stop asking, what is right? And start asking, how much longer can I tolerate this? And that shift changes everything. But here's the truth. Tiredness can sound exactly like guidance if you don't know how to recognize the difference. And that is where most people get lost, because when you're emotionally exhausted, even the wrong exit feels like relief. Even uncertainty feels like direction. Even silence feels like confirmation. This is where everything shifts, not in the situation itself, but in how you interpret it. One day you wake up and something inside you says, I can't do this anymore. And you assume that sentence is wisdom. But what if it's not wisdom at all? What if it's fatigue speaking with authority? Most people miss this part. They believe every strong internal feeling is a spiritual signal. But not every strong feeling comes from clarity. Some come from pressure. Some come from repeated disappointment. Some come from emotional depletion that has built up over time. And when you're in that state, even patience starts to feel like suffering. Even growth starts to feel like delay. Even lessons start to feel like punishment. And slowly, without realizing it, you start building your decision on exhaustion instead of direction. But here's the deeper question. What if the very moment you feel like leaving is the moment you are least equipped to make a permanent decision? Think about it. When you are emotionally drained, your mind doesn't evaluate fairly. It filters everything through pain. It magnifies what hurts. It minimizes what's still meaningful. It deletes every reason you once had to stay, and all that remains is escape. But escape always feels justified in the moment. This is where everything becomes dangerous, because now you are not asking God, what should I do? You are asking your exhaustion, how do I stop feeling this? And those two questions do not lead to the same place. One leads to clarity, the other leads to reaction. So pause here. Before you make a decision you cannot reverse emotionally, ask yourself something deeper than comfort. Am I being led, or am I trying to relieve pressure? Because pressure will always try to convince you that leaving is the answer. But pressure is not always a sign to move. It can also be a sign you are being shaped. Now imagine something. If you leave from exhaustion, you don't just leave the situation. You leave without understanding what was happening inside you. And later, life quietly brings you a similar experience, different face, different story, same emotional weight, and you wonder why it keeps happening again. But here's the truth most people discover too late. You don't break cycles by escaping them. You break cycles by understanding them. And understanding requires presence when everything inside you wants absence. This is the real tension, not whether you can leave, but whether you should discern before you decide. Because sometimes God does say go, but sometimes He is saying stay long enough to see clearly. And the difference between those two will determine whether your decision brings peace or repetition. So the question is not just emotional, it is spiritual. It is psychological. It is deeply revealing. Are you leaving because God said go, or because you're tired of staying? Because one leads you into alignment, and the other may just lead you into another version of the same lesson you haven't fully learned yet. So now everything comes full circle. Not every feeling of relief is peace. Sometimes it's escape. Not every intense situation is destruction. Sometimes it's assignment. Not every voice that says leave is clarity. Sometimes it's exhaustion speaking, and not every ending feels like God's direction, even when it feels justified in the moment, because the real battle was never just about that person. It was about your perception, your timing, your discernment, your ability to see beyond emotion when emotion feels the loudest. And here's what you finally need to understand. The decision was never meant to be made in panic. It was never meant to be rushed in exhaustion. It was never meant to be shaped by what hurts the most in the moment. It was meant to be revealed in clarity. But here's the deeper realization. Some of the things you wanted to end immediately were not meant to confuse you, but to transform you. And some of the things you almost walked away from were not meant to trap you, but to teach you how to see differently. Now you understand, but only a few will apply it. Because understanding is easy, discernment is harder, and patience in emotional pressure is rare. So before you make any final decision in your life, pause long enough to ask the one question this entire message has been pointing to. Is this God leading me? Or is this my exhaustion trying to protect me? Because one leads to alignment you can't see yet, and the other leads to repetition you won't understand until it happens again. And if you've made it this far, don't just hear it once and move on. Listen to this again, because the second time it will hit differently. The parts you missed the first time will speak the loudest the second time, and maybe, just maybe, what you thought was confusion was actually clarity waiting for you to slow down enough to see it. And when you finally do, you won't just decide differently. You will become someone who no longer mistakes exhaustion for direction and emotion for truth.